Welcome to The Heart of the Matter, an Our Place podcast, where we look at the issues surrounding homelessness, addiction, and mental health on the streets of Greater Victoria. For today's broadcast of Heart of the Matter, we welcome our local MLA, Grace Lower.
So I'm the Minister of State for Childcare. It's a new post for me. I'm just a month into it. I was previously the Parliamentary Secretary for Gender Equity, so thrilled to take on this new role.
Excellent. So I kind of want to talk about, in this podcast, we're talking a lot about homelessness, addiction, what we're seeing on the streets. So when you're talking to people, in and around the area, what are their impressions of homelessness?
Yeah, I would say that constituents, members of our community here in Victoria, care a lot about their fellow community members, and that includes our neighbors who are unhoused, who are homeless. It's certainly one of the major themes, major issues that folks raise to me, that folks want to talk about in our community, and I think, without a doubt, many of the members of our community are involved in advocacy groups or mutual aid groups. And, when you ask the question, one of the things I think about is that period in late 2020 where there was an encampment near Royal Athletic Park and it flooded, and then there was wind, and there was just really clear and quick action from community members to help folks relocate, to get pallets so people were not on the ground. At the same time, there remains stigmatization, there remains generalization, there remains discrimination, and directed at our community members who are unhoused. And I think we do have a lot of work to do together to work on connection and compassion and understanding. And in that case, I think of the Aboriginal Coalition on Homelessness and some of their work around stigma and language and how important the words we use are. And I think it's things like that are opportunities to learn from, the Existence Project, for example, that we really need to stay committed to when it comes to how we understand the issue and the people in our community.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, we see a lot of the issues changing on a daily basis, which I think shows you how complex it is. Like so much of the addiction issues that we're seeing now, and they tend to take sort of all of the option out of the room. We don't realize that there's also seniors who are losing their housing, they're ending up on the street, and there are people who don't have addiction or mental health issues that are struggling, but it's certainly a complex issue.
Absolutely.
What is something that you wish your constituents knew more about of those struggling with homelessness?
I think you really touched on some of the key pieces there, just how varied the challenges are and how varied the people are. We do know that people struggling and people facing homelessness are often navigating compounding issues, whether it's mental health, addiction, trauma, poverty. We do know also that 30 to 40% of the homeless community are Indigenous. So we know the role of colonialism, of intergenerational trauma in residential schools. We also, as you said, know that it's not one person, one type of person, and there are people with employment who have an income and are facing homelessness, seniors, and so I think some of those misconceptions or generalizations aren't helpful. Some folks point to or suggest that people who are homeless in our community are new here, or not part of our community, when the evidence suggests otherwise. These are our neighbors, these are long-term residents of our community.
Everybody that I talk to who's on the street, they've all faced some form of childhood trauma or abuse, whether that's prenatal or early sexual, physical, mental abuse. So I'm kind of wondering, with this new portfolio, are there things that you can do or that you can implement that could curb the issues of, poverty, addiction, and mental health in children?
Yeah, I think the kinds of challenges that people are facing in our community, and that, the volume has really turned up over the last 2 years with the pandemic, with the other public health crisis that is our toxic drug supply, is an all of government approach. And I know my colleagues, as MLAs representing their communities, as ministers, are thinking constantly of these issues as they matter around government. In this new role as Minister of State for Childcare, one of the things I can't stop thinking about is the impact of fee reduction and $10 a day on families. For many in our community and across the province, childcare costs are the same as rent. If you've got 2 little kids, it can be higher. So, over the last few years, we've reduced fees by up to $900 a month per kid. And the $10 a day sites, including many here in Victoria, I mean, families are paying $250, $200 a month. And so this is homelessness prevention. This is for kids. We know that their success depends on safe, nurturing, learning opportunities early in life. So both as a homelessness prevention, as a poverty prevention for families right now, but also for those kids early on to have safe places to be, to have opportunities for learning and connection. I think, we kind of can't overstate the impact that childcare as a core service here in BC will have in the long term. That said, there's obviously a lot we need to do right across government. Our poverty reduction strategy covers other themes like housing and income and social supports, and raising the minimum wage. I think also about some of the supports recently over the last year or two for former kids in care, youth transitioning into adulthood. We know, and to your point around trauma, we know it can be a super highway to homelessness and poverty. So income supports, rental supplements, extending government support of youth till they're 27. I think some of these things are going to make a really big difference over time.
Yeah, definitely. I grew up in Scotland in the council homes and stuff like that there, but I remember how important the school lunch meals were. Like for some of the kids, and I was lucky. I was a working, member of a working class family, so I never went hungry. But I also remember how important it was for some of the kids to get that hot meal at lunch. And as you think back of it now as an adult, you realize that hot meal was not only the nutrition they needed, but it also kind of stopped them going into the criminality mode of having to steal to get food, to get things like that. And I'm so pleased when the government starts thinking back about how important all these different ways are, and because how it impacts them as they become an adult. If we can take care of the children, we get healthier adults.
Without a doubt, we get healthier adults, and we're also in that moment looking after those parents who want to care for their kids, who are looking for all the opportunities for their kids to be healthy and fed and to succeed. And so with the childcare fee reductions to lift that weight off families is serving 2 generations at a time. And, I think a lot of this, we talk about childcare, we talk about education, food security, poverty reduction. A lot of this comes down to housing too. And we know this is a challenge across the board in our community. And our government has really continued to put a priority on this issue. We have a new Minister of Housing, a standalone ministry to rise to some of these challenges. And for some of the folks that our place serves, we've got supportive housing units that have opened over the last few years, but many more that are imminent now, including on Yates Street, just across the street, really from me here in my community office over on Mears, and on Catherine Street. So we need housing across the spectrum. That supportive housing is one important element, but housing tied to income, shelter rate housing, these are all things that are being built, some of which have opened, but lots more being built here in Victoria because it's so needed. We need to look after families and our community members, and part of that is certainly a safe place for people to live.
Absolutely. I mean, we are certainly seeing more sort of seniors coming into our place, and for so many of them, it's the first time in their life that they've ever thought they would need the help of an organization such as our place, and it's heartbreaking, and a lot of that has to do with, you know, rent evictions and the rental side of it and stuff like that. The one thing I want to chat a little bit about addiction. I mean, it's really what we're seeing so much of on the street, you know, alongside mental health. But when I look at addiction, the Portugal model, which seems to be on the right track, has put much more emphasis on treatment, recovery, and reintegration back into the community. Do you think we should be doing more when it comes to recovery resources?
There's so much for us to do. I mean, we know people are losing their lives, but we also know folks are experiencing brain damage, loss of housing. There is such an unprecedented and unacceptable level of harm coming out of addiction in our communities right now. So our government's taking a few different approaches here. So we are working to separate people from the toxic drug supply, the unpredictable supply that is taking lives. So that's why, as you noted, we've introduced prescribed safe supply. In addition to, we're the first province to do that, and also the first province to explore and move towards decriminalization. At the same time, we're needing to build up a system for addiction and mental health. This was an area that was ignored, underfunded, cut for a long time. So in addition to the safer supply and decriminalization, we're investing in free and low cost counseling through organizations like Peers, the Foundry, and many others, as well as complex care, which are those wraparound things, wraparound services and supports people need. To your point around recovery, this is really important too. All the options need to be there. We opened the first 6 beds on the island specifically for women as parliamentary secretary for gender equity in my previous role. There are gendered elements to the trauma, to the experience of homelessness and addiction. And so that's really essential. Also, youth beds around the province, working to have peer assisted care teams that's coming to Victoria. These are the kinds of things we can have the wraparound care so that we can then build those relationships and connections towards recovery. There is so much more for us to do on this front. There's no question. I connect with organizations like yourself, like Umbrella, who are doing this work. It's a priority for me personally and our government.
And I think this is something that maybe we don't always calculate, but it's like, this isn't something that was created overnight. You know, this took decades of being underfunded and cuts and pet projects instead of healthcare education. And then whatever government happens to be in charge when the crisis kind of hits a boiling point, although I think we have several boiling points, they kind of have to come up with these solutions, but it really is decades in the making, and now we're facing the consequences of those sort of cuts to healthcare and those kinds of things over the decades. Are there any upcoming sort of legislative changes that you're excited about that you feel will help people who are suffering from, you know, homelessness and addiction?
Yeah, there is lots on the move in kind of all the different areas that we've talked about. So the decriminalization comes into effect at the end of this month, January 31st. That's going to be an important piece of the puzzle, just one. The decriminalization to address stigma, prevent criminalization. So that's upcoming. As I mentioned, there's a number of supportive housing units that are really imminent in the next few months, including what I'm really excited about in Vic West on Catherine Street. It's supportive housing, but it's culturally supportive housing run by the Aboriginal Coalition and Homelessness. And I think, we have a new Premier David Eby's really signaled a commitment over this first bit that he's in this role around more housing, around more on the support for folks, the kind of folks that our place serves, and the diversity of the people that you serve.
I mean, we're very excited because Albina Street, we don't have a name for it yet, but that's where it is. Albina Street will be opening in March, I think, or February, but soon. It's coming soon. So we're excited about that. That's 54 beds. So there's, and very sort of independent living, but with those appropriate supports for people, which I think will be extremely positive, not just for those people, but also for the neighborhood.
Yes, me too. And I think that's a really important point, that kind of we're needing to build at this point in time the whole spectrum. So we're investing in 100 units of complex care. And then the supportive housing, and then the spaces in between that and kind of market housing, but also the rental supplements to support those who are in market housing, and to be able to build that whole spectrum of housing. The task is big, but there is lots happening, and it really can be, and I think will be, life-changing for individuals, but also communities.
BC Housing did a great job buying or leasing all of those hotels and getting people in off the street. And we have really noticed, because we have housed over 500 people we're managing sites just in the last, 3 years. But it's interesting when you get people inside and they start to stabilize, and you start to see those different levels, and you can't really tell that right off the bat when they're in tents, when they're struggling to survive. It's just all about survival. But when you get them indoors and you start to break it down, you really see how there are some people that need very, very little support. So, I mean, a lot of times it's just they need that companionship. They just need someone to say hello to them in the morning, and maybe some tools in there, like how to use a washing machine and how to properly use a kettle and a microwave and things like that. And then there's other people that are just, they almost need 24/7 care, because they need to be taking their medications. They need to, have that full-time counseling support. So it is really quite interesting that and shows the need for such a wide range of housing to address the people we need.
Well, and Grant, I want to not let that slip by, that what you're observing there, what our place has observed, but also the work that organizations, our place, among them, really central to the work that have taken on the kind of growth in need over the last few years. And when the pandemic hit, and many of these challenges that were not new, but due to those decades of cuts, were really turned outside, made public, the volume turned up. The growth in response, ability to provide that housing. I'm so grateful to organizations like our place, Peers, again, Umbrella, these organizations that really rose to this challenge. But also what you say about once you've got folks inside, being able to have a sense of their needs. I've talked to people who tell me about how people need their pictures retaken after a few months living in the housing, because they look different. They look like different people by just that safe place to be. At the same time, the hotels were necessary, but they were very reactive to need to get people inside. We have continued the work, and as a government, we're I think making this switch to proactive, to these purpose-built, and you've named a few, I've named a few, purpose-built buildings with supports for people. So moving from that kind of reactive to address to that spectrum of housing and supports over time.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, the one thing that we hear a lot of, it's kind of part of the last municipal election, um, where city councillors really want to pitch in, they want to help with the local issues that they're seeing. So many of the issues I think are larger than the municipal politicians can kind of handle. They need the provincial support and the federal support. But can you help our listeners kind of understand the relationship between the provincial government and the municipal government and how they interact together?
Well, the challenges that we've talked about here are so significant, and as you've said, not created, overnight. And so it really, I think, is kind of all the people in all the places to do this work together. So I'm really of the mind of collaboration and coordination with our city counterparts. And I think none of us will do our individual jobs successfully without that collaboration. So for the province at a provincial level, we work, across ministries. We've talked about some of the responsibilities that are the provincial government that are so important: education, healthcare, childcare, housing. But we do so with the City of Victoria, with not-for-profits like Our Place, that it is has to be this coordinated work. So everyone pulling together, as my colleague Melanie Marks says, paddling together in the same direction is how we'll get there. And I want to say that City of Victoria has been a really incredible and willing partner in this work, things that are provincial responsibility but have a local component. We've had a really good relationship, and I think some of the supportive housing units that are going up quickly that didn't face long periods of time are because the city asked the province, welcomed the province in doing some of this work. And so I think that is part of the what's gotten a few of these buildings going and will be part of our success in the longer term. We as a province are making steps to encourage other municipalities to be doing this work. We've signaled and we've passed some legislation to enable us to encourage municipalities around zoning and creating housing, because this is a problem and a challenge here in Victoria, but it is not Victoria's challenge. So we have the power and the opportunity as a provincial government to be working with municipalities to do this better. So we've got some of the major responsibilities here around mental health, around housing, and more. And we only do that successfully when we work with our partners at the city and with those on the ground like yourself, who are on the front line with that expertise and can deliver that service.
And we certainly hear, I guess obviously live in BC, so we hear a lot about the BC government's their calls to action, but we're also hearing quite a bit from Alberta, their calls to action around homelessness and addiction. And I kind of wonder, what do you think it would take for the federal government to really declare this a crisis, or to declare this as a pandemic? I know we're sort of calling them out on this, but it never seems to quite spur into national action.
Yeah, I think, much like these challenges we've talked about weren't kind of created and won't be addressed overnight, there was a period in the past where the federal government was very active on housing, including on things like co-ops, and then they weren't. And so I think that's part of the story to get us here. As a provincial government, we've are the only province also building housing on reserve with First Nations. That's clearly a federal responsibility, but the need is there. These are our folks in our province, so we're taking kind of action on wherever it is, because pausing to say, oh, whose job this is when people need housing isn't going to get us very far. At the same time, we've seen the federal government come through with some rapid housing initiative funding for things that are like ready to go, that are close. And we as a province have partnered with them or we both contributed funding to things to really get both levels of government, and along with the CRD and the city, everybody kind of involved. So again, I think it's all hands on deck. And I was very glad to see the federal government have a new round of rapid housing funding, and I know our MLA, our MP rather, Laurel Collins, and her folks were kind of key in pushing for another round of that. I hope that's an important signal of what the federal government might see its role as.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. I mean, as I said earlier, coming from Scotland and living in council homes, which were tied to your income, and also to the size of your family. Like, when I was born, we lived in a small 2-bedroom apartment. And then when my sister was born, we got upgraded to a 3-bedroom duplex. But it was all council housing. It was all based on your income. And then you come to Canada, which is such a rich country where you could actually, at that time, this was the 70s, 80s, you could afford to buy a home. Back then, I think a home was roughly 1 to 2 years gross income, bought you a home, and that's changed dramatically. And I almost wonder if I'm thinking federally, but if we're thinking that Canada is still the same as it was in the 80s, that opportunity to own a home or to rent something cheap is accessible. And if maybe we're going to have to look at more options like council homes for people based on their income.
I think certainly here in BC, our government knows that's not the case. We know how out of reach home ownership is for many. And that's why, in addition to the kind of supportive housing and complex care we've talked about, there's in Fernwood, in James Bay, there are developments, for example, that are going up where most of the units are tied to income or at shelter rates, so for people on income assistance. So we're building some of that's affordable rentals. Some of that is underway. But I think, the new Minister of Housing's mandate letter, the direction he's been given from the Premier, includes things like funding for Build BC, where we're looking at different ways to have alternative build more, to find different ways for rental acquisition. What's the role for not-for-profits? So certainly I think we know it's not the case. We know that we need housing that works for people, lots of that under construction, more to do, and a clear indication from our Premier and the Minister of Housing that we are going to look at other ways of doing
it. I want to circle back to something you said, just kind of, because I was just thinking, you were talking about decriminalization. And I just kind of thought, maybe a lot of listeners don't quite understand what that means or what the implications of that are. Could you kind of talk a wee bit about that?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So the idea is that below a certain level of amount of what are illegal drugs wouldn't be treated as a criminal offense. And what that does is for folks when they have interactions with police, for example, won't be arrested or charged for possession of a small amount of drugs. Thinking that ending up in jail or with a criminal record is not actually how we're going to support folks in getting their needs met and taking steps forward in getting the care that they need. I think also another example apart from drugs is the peer assisted care teams. We know often currently and in the past. And again, due to a long time of underfunding the kinds of services people need, but police have been the ones to respond to mental health crisis. And so that is a kind of response that looks like you're responding to a crime, and mental health crisis isn't a crime, but the response is there. So creating alternatives like a peer team to provide care in response, having someone else to call is, what I would call the decriminalization of mental health crisis. So that we've got that team funded, and they're getting up and running, run by ABI. And so, when we think about decriminalization, I think, we often talk about drug possession up to a certain level, but I think we can also think about mental health.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's that peer team. Interesting enough, our CEO Julian actually ran something like very similar to that in Edmonton. And I know it's been embraced by the police and the community, so we know that it's a very positive thing. Well, I want to thank you for joining us today, Grace. And I'm wondering, is there anything I missed? Anything you'd like to add?
Well, I really appreciate the chance to chat with you, to connect, to talk about these issues, the issues that are facing our community, that are, our unhoused neighbors are navigating, and really my gratitude and appreciation to Our Place and the many other not-for-profits in our community who are on the front lines of this work, and as you said, navigating changes in complexity, and who've done so over two public health crises, a pandemic, the toxic drug supply. I think enough can't be said about the people in our community on the front lines, those who do advocacy, who reach out to me, who want more care, more support, more housing. And just to reiterate, for me, this is a priority as the local MLA, and know it is for my colleagues across government as well.
Well, thank you very much for joining us. And I know you're going to have a busy year. We'll keep in touch.
Thanks so much, Grant.
Thanks. Bye.
You've been listening to the Heart of the Matter podcast. For more information about Our Place and the vital programs and services provided to the Greater Victoria community, please go to www.ourplacesociety.com. Our Place is a registered BC charity. You can donate by visiting the website or by calling 250-940-5060. Help us to bring hope and belonging to those in need.